Hi, I'm Gavin Holmes, and today I'll be presenting my Project 4 remix, The Malevolent Mistress of the West. Alright, Wei Qi, otherwise known as Go, is a traditional Chinese strategy game that focuses on surrounding your opponent on all fronts. This strategy game is a perfect analogy for the ambitions and goals of the Chinese government. As uninformed Westerners, it can be hard to fathom that a totalitarian government, which imprisons their racial minorities and drowns other countries in debt, sits 6,000 miles off the coast of California. It is even harder to comprehend that this government has been sucking the West dry for decades to fuel their meteoric rise as they, quote, the world's only superpower. You can thank the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, in other words, for these acts. Moreover, the CCP is involved in a full-blown effort to surpass the rest of the world technologically, economically, and militarily by any means necessary. Motives that are more sobering than they are scary. Before I even begin, I want to state that I am specifically talking about the Chinese government, not the citizens of China or Chinese Americans. War is not fought like it was a few decades ago. There are many more battlegrounds / fronts in modern wars that we are completely ignorant towards, such as the technological and economic fronts. Because of globalization, the world economy has been much more interwoven since it was back in, say, the 60s. After the Cold War ended, the Chinese Communist Party took elements of capitalism and communism and created the foundation for the Chinese state-owned enterprises, otherwise known as SOEs. These SOEs are absolutely massive, and they comprise over 30% of China's GDP. These SOEs are also managed by the State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission of the State Council, a direct governmental agency, manages these enterprises. These enterprises also are pretty much under the complete control of the Chinese government. They are forced to submit documents, submit info if asked, and there's no laws protecting the privacy and information of the consumers. In April 2020, FBI Director Christopher Wray gave a talk on China's influence in the U.S. and encapsulated the essence of this new battleground with the quote, "In our modern world, there is perhaps no more ominous prospect than a hostile foreign government's ability to compromise our country's infrastructure and devices." To begin to truly understand the CCP, you have to throw out the notion that corporations are separate from governments, because that could not be further from the truth in this case. One of the biggest tools the CCP has is the company Huawei Technologies. Huawei is one of the largest, the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, and they hold great influence in in global telecommunications markets. As the world nears 5G technology, Huawei has played a very pivotal role and has attempted to commit espionage efforts around the globe. Many of these efforts from Huawei are more closely related to the operations and actions of the Chinese government. Furthermore, Christopher Wray stated, if Chinese companies like Huawei are given unfettered access to our telecommunications infrastructures, they could collect any of your information that traverses their devices or networks, or still would have no choice to report to the Chinese government if asked. Like I said, they have laws in place to enforce this dangerous form of economic symbiosis. Furthermore, the FBI also opens up a new counterintelligence case against China every 10 hours, and half of all counterintelligence cases active in the U.S. are related to China. The CCP also steals massive amounts of federally funded research from American institutions and federal agencies via their Thousand Talents program. The Talents program has mutated into an economic espionage monstrosity. It acts as a vehicle for the CCP to bribe experts for proprietary information, and this information is typically federally funded research in science, military, technology, or sensitive trade secrets. One notable case of this is Charles M. Lieber, the person you're seeing up on the screen. Lieber was Harvard's Department of Chemistry and Biology, and was chair of Harvard's Chemistry and Biology Department. Charles M. Lieber was federally indicted for his cooperation with the CCP and his involvement in the Thousand Talents program. In return for his cooperation, Lieber received a $50,000 monthly stipend and over $150,000 for living expenses. This exchange was simply because Lieber provided the Chinese government with proprietary information on his research, which was funded by over $15 million in taxpayer money, according to the Department of Justice. Everyday Americans like you and I are footing the bill for China's technological development. And these attacks on the West on the technological front are extremely sobering, but it is only a small part of a much bigger and more sinister plan. The Belt and Road Initiative. This may seem like a very, kind infrastructure project, but it couldn't be further from the truth. In the economic battleground, the CCP is determined to become the economic powerhouse of the globe and will not stop at anything to achieve that goal. If we take a look at the economy of China, we see a very normal and rapid increase in gross domestic product. And you may think this is simply because labor is cheaper across the Pacific. However, that is not the case. The most threatening campaign coming from the Chinese Communist Party is the Belt and Road Initiative. And this campaign has already impacted the lives of hundreds of millions of people around the world. The BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, paints itself as a very beneficial project for global trade. But in reality, it is centered around making China the economic powerhouse of the globe and cementing their place in global trade. A very notable example of the Chinese Communist Party's debt trap diplomacy is the case of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan President Basil Rajapaksa, as you can see right here, was a frequent borrower of Chinese money. However, let me get my point back here. I apologize. Sri Lankan President Basil Rajapaksa took on a considerable amount of debt from China, as he was a frequent customer. After taking these massive loans from China, the China Harbor Engineering Company, another Chinese state-owned enterprise, funny enough, built a massive port in Sri Lanka, opening up shop in one of the world's biggest shipping lanes. However, when the time came to collect their loan, China was ruthless in their negotiations, and it ended with Sri Lanka giving China over 150,000 acres of land and the port that they offered to build in the country. The situation gets even more sinister upon realizing that China funded President Rajapaksa's re-election campaign in hopes to lend the country even more money and to put them into even more debt. This practice is called debt trap diplomacy, and already Sri Lanka is not the only country to feel the negative effects of it. Many African countries have been subject to debt trap diplomacy and are currently suffering and are rethinking the idea of taking Chinese loans. China's GDP has skyrocketed since the mid-'80s and has increased by an average of 9.23% compared to the US's average of 3.2%. This rapid Period of GDP growth was fueled by cheap labor, China's closed economy, and the leveraging of malign foreign influence. The CCP utilized its massive labor force and their cheap labor laws to steal manufacturing jobs from the West. In January, CNBC reported that the US has lost around 3.7 million manufacturing jobs to China. This transfer of jobs directly affects the American people, not American corporations. And this transfer is a major reason why the issue of the CCP pertains to each and every one of us. The CCP has ran into one massive roadblock in their economic development, the region of Xinjiang. Before I start, I just want to preface that this can be a very sensitive topic to most people, and it talks about genocide and some other possibly triggering topics. So, if you find anything related to this disturbing and unsettling, I apologize, and this warning is here for you. The region of Xinjiang is home to an ethnic minority called the Muslim Uyghurs, which made up more than 80% of the population of Xinjiang in 1945. After 1945, the Chinese government began emphasizing the importance of moving to the region of Xinjiang, and this was a use of state-sponsored migration. And this state-sponsored migration diluted the Muslim Uyghur population drastically. Currently in Xinjiang, the Muslim Uyghur population in Xinjiang has dwindled to around 46.1%, nearly half of what it was in 1945 before the state-sponsored migration. The CCP then deployed mass amounts of surveillance and began the mass detainment of Muslim Uyghurs, sending them to quote-unquote re-education camps. These re-education camps hold a strong resemblance to the concentration camps of World War II. Furthermore, a German researcher and whistleblower in Xinjiang named Adrian Zenz stated that, quote, "This is the largest internment of an ethnic or religious minority since the Holocaust." And all of this is to maintain control over the region because it is so vital to China's economic development. The reason why Xinjiang is so vital to its economic development is because Xinjiang is actually right on top of where the Silk Road used to be. And China desperately needs this trading route to form the fully developed Belt and Road Initiative. This region of Xinjiang is a gateway to Eastern Europe and Northeast and North Europe as well. These re-education camps, mass surveillance, and detainment cost the CCP a lot of money, but the investment in this territory will pay off once the CCP obtains this trade route. As of November 2020, there is an estimated 1.5 million Muslim Uyghurs detained. However, this is only an estimate, and the real number could be much, much higher. The CCP has fought extremely hard to keep these camps secret and utilizes one of their covert operations, Fox Hunt, to silence whistleblowers and pressure them into returning to China, to be detained. In another segment of his talk, FBI Director Christopher Wray states that Fox Hunt is a sweeping bid by General Secretary Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, to target Chinese nationals whom he sees as the threats and who live outside of China. We're talking about political rivals, dissidents, and critics seeking to expose China's extensive human rights violations. These hostile actions, domestic, foreign, and abroad, pose a massive threat to human rights and to global democracy as a whole. One thing is clear: the CCP must be stopped. However, they are prepared for a fight if push comes to shove. China has been fighting on many fronts, but the traditional boots on the ground type of warfare is something that the Chinese Communist Party still strongly believes in. China has been steadily increasing their military spending and has actually doubled their military spending since 2010. As China has created cheap profits for Americans and Westerners alike. It has used these profits to fund their own military development and their military strength. In fact, a very scary fact about China's military is that they actually now have a larger navy than the US. China now, due to China's large navy, they actually have 350 battleships, as opposed to the U.S. Navy's 293. My bad. I grew up in the West, and hearing this information feels kind of like I'm hearing a made-up fairy tale, or I'm living within a very important time in history. The latter is very true, but it is very fathomable that these things are happening, and we should be paying close attention to these things as they do happen. The Chinese military is also catching up in vital sectors such as their Air Force. In the Department of Defense's annual report to Congress titled Military and Security Developments Involving the People's Republic of China, it states, the Chinese Air Force is rapidly catching up to Western air forces across a broad range of capabilities and competencies. We need to be paying attention to this. It is a very important thing and a very important topic. But at the same time, we also are once again met with an old friend, the nuclear arms race. A Cold War between China and the US would not be complete without a nuclear arms race, and China already has a head start on the West. As the US decreases their nuclear arsenal due to their involvement in treaties like the NPT, Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty, China has rejected any involvement in nuclear weapon limitation talks. While the US is reducing their nuclear count, China is actively building it and has actually set out to double their nuclear arsenal by 2025. The CCP has made massive breakthroughs in their nuclear technology and has shown off these capabilities at every turn, a slight nudge at the West. This is something we need to be paying attention to, much more closer attention than we are now. In conclusion, the CCP is ruthless, controlling, and determined in order to become a global superpower. They will not stop and won't allow any setback to get in their way. They are truly out for blood, and we are in a second Cold War. What's next? Well, we should not focus our hate on Chinese Americans or Chinese students or people that are of Chinese descent or are even from China. The people of China are not to blame for this. The people that are to blame are the people in high government positions like Xi Jinping and general secretaries and his advisors. What we should do, though, is we should focus on spreading information about China's wrongdoings and encourage other countries to hold them accountable as well.